So, welcome back to the Holistic Meets Education podcast. Today, I'm super excited because we get to know a little bit more about who SARA Stein is. Welcome, all you truth seekers, to this podcast, and hopefully, you get a better insight of who she is. So, we're going to kick this off, and I'm going to go ahead and start the interview. So the first question, I want to start this question off first, right? Because this is an unfiltered podcast. So, SARA, we all have fears, right? We definitely all have fears. So my first question to you is, what are your fears? Do you have any fears?
Yeah, so definitely. I think we all have fears. And for me, I think the biggest fear is probably living life not in my truth. So going through life just with the goal of pleasing somebody else and doing something, to serve, the joys of somebody else. And you basically then become unfulfilled, right? And so you go through life, however many years you get. And most people, when they're lying on their deathbed, usually their biggest regret is, not pursuing or trying whatever it is that they wanted to because they were too afraid of what someone else thought or, XYZ. But that, I would say, is the biggest fear for me, just going through life without, going through it the way I want it to, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you all. I'm gonna be honest about that. When I said asking a fear, she did amazing. She went really deep because I'm thinking, oh, are you afraid of spiders? Are you afraid? But that's amazing. And that definitely resonates, to be afraid to not be your authentic self. That's awesome. Okay, so I want to ask you, what do you consider is your best asset or your best strength?
That's a good one. I would say probably my best asset is similar to sort of the previous answer, my kind of ability to be direct, or just the honesty that I have. I don't like to sugarcoat things. I like to kind of speak my truth and kind of say it how it is. And, sometimes it could, depending on, the circumstance or the person, can come off as a little bit maybe intense, but I'm the type of person that would rather be truthful than kind of pretend things are some type of way. And then, so my honesty and just directness, I guess.
Love that. Okay, see, don't you love her already, you all? We love honest people. Love it. Okay, so what are some things that you like to do in your spare time? Like, what are your hobbies?
So I like to do a variety of different things. I love anything that is, creative in terms of art, cooking, baking. I like being outside, gardening, anything that sort of kind of has my body connected in a way. So either like I'm doing something with my hands, or, I'm, doing some other things, but it's either something crafty, or yoga is another big thing for me. So movement and creative insights, and playing my flute too. Music, art.
The gifts, the many gifts, people that she possesses. Amazing. Now listen, SARA, as far as the gardening goes, now I really would need some assistance. Because really, I don't think a lot of people understand how peaceful gardening can truly be. So yeah, I think that's awesome. And like you said, with the art, being creative, with yoga, like you said, grinding yourself, that's amazing. It really is. You have a lot of hobbies. Oh man.
Thank you.
All right. So we know what Sarah's hobbies are. What motivates you? What is something that helps you to push you on a daily, or something that is your motivation?
So this is a deep question. I actually really love this question. So years ago, if you would have asked me this question, I would have responded with somebody else, like my parents or my teacher or, anybody else. But really, it's me, and like beyond myself, I have many pictures of myself, like when I was younger in my room. And I have specifically one that really resonates on my altar from when I want to say maybe like 3 years old or 4 years old, something like really young. And I look at that picture every day, and I just reflect on how far I've come, and sort of what I've come to realize is that every moment in our life is like the choices that we make individually. At the end of the day, it's not someone else making the choices for us. It's us making the choices, good, bad, ugly, all of it. So it's myself that motivates me. It comes from like within, right? Because if it's external, like validation or anything like that, once that external source is, removed from your life or whatever the case may be, then what? Then what happens? Then you're just going to do nothing? Like, no. So it has to come from you. So that's my answer to that.
Can I be honest? Like, I've never heard anybody say that's what motivates them, right? When you ask that question, that kind of struck me, because you made a good point. When those external things go away, a person, then what? What will continue to keep you motivated inside? And that is true. You have to have that within yourself. You have to be intentional and make that conscious decision to do that on a daily. See, y'all, I'm telling you, Sarah's a beef sister, I'm telling you. Okay. All right. So tell me 3 places that you would like, where you would like to travel. 3 places. Why?
Okay. So I haven't traveled most of the world, so I have a whole list of places I would like to visit, but I would say top 3 probably, gosh. Okay, number 1 is a place called Samoa, which it's an island in between Hawaii and New Zealand. Geographically, it's similar to Hawaii in the sense that it's like relatively like warm, and there's a lot of nature and things like that. It also has areas that is more jungle like, which different parts of Hawaii has as well. So that's probably my top choice. The other 2, Argentina. I actually found out a few years ago that I have a distant relative that lives there. And I'd really love to visit. There's a lot of dance influences that come from there. So, and I used to do ballroom dancing when I was younger, so I feel like that'd be fun. And probably the 3rd, oh gosh, this is hard. I would say probably Croatia. I feel like I've been wanting to go there for a while, and I honestly don't know why, but I feel like it's a big city, so there's like the beaches, and there's like the cultural points, has a little bit of everything, but I have no idea why Croatia just keeps popping up again and again, so I guess I have to go there sometime.
Wow, those are some cool places. Samoa, wow. Okay, Croatia. Okay, I hear you. Yeah, listen, I'm going to speak that into existence that you will travel there. Okay. All right. So, I'm going to ask you something that I think, well, I know you will love this question. What brings you joy? What brings Sarah happiness and joy?
Okay. This is probably my favorite question. So the first thing I wanted to say in response to that is that to me, so there's a difference between joy and happiness. And again, I think joy is something that comes from like internal, like it's from within, versus happiness is something that you experience because of something. So happiness is more so, it could be fleeting or temporary, versus joy is sort of something that you exude like from within. But I'll answer both parts. So what would make me happy and what would, what brings me joy? So what makes me happy? Gosh, this is a difficult one. Anything in nature, in its natural state. So just going outside and observing the animals, the plants, the sun shining, that is like my ideal morning. Just sunrise, watching just nature in its true element, which then kind of reminds me about ourselves as humans, how we sort of are perfect just as we are. Like there's no need to go and change any aspect of us. It's more so this idea of accepting ourselves for where we are now. Yeah, so that's definitely something that brings me happiness. Children in general, just being like innocent and pure and like running around. I also work with children in different capacities. So children, food. I mentioned earlier that I love to cook and I love to bake. So I love playing around with different ingredients and coming up with something delicious. And of course, homemade most of the time from scratch. Yeah, so that's what makes me happy. What brings me joy? This is really hard. I would just say, I guess, just being the moments where I'm myself without any judgment. So a lot of times, I try my best to be myself and be who I really am without any filter, without trying to please anybody else. And when I do that, there's a good percentage of the time where I catch myself in my mind, saying something along the lines of like, oh, like, why are you doing that? Or that's weird, or that's stupid. But the moments where I just let go and just be are the things that give me joy, just with anything in life, just where I'm just present, not judging myself.
Oh, that's beautiful, Sarah. That's beautiful. Now you're gonna have to help me in the kitchen with my cooking skills. I'm okay, but I don't know if I can make all the stuff like you can from scratch. I don't know. But yeah, what you said about what brings you joy, yeah, that's amazing. To not feel judged. That does make you feel good to know that you can be you and not feel bad for being who you are. So that's amazing. All right. So what do you want to accomplish in the next year?
What do I want to accomplish in next year? So one of my biggest goals, that's I guess a short-term goal that's more attainable, is I want to move out of my parents' home, and not only just move out of my parents' home, but move into a home that feels like a home. So there's certain things that I sort of envision myself living near or in. So I definitely would love to do that. Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest goal right now. Moving to a home that is aligned with everything that I'm looking for.
Nice. That's a nice goal. That's an awesome accomplishment. Okay. Look, I know how it would probably look. It would be very mindful, a lot of mindfulness. Would it be a lot of yoga, a lot of different art, a lot of create? Yeah, I could say yeah, very creative. Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely like I would like to live somewhere that's sort of, I love the sun, as I mentioned earlier, and I love, I would love to be able to live in a place where I can see like the sunrise and the sunset every day. At the same time, I feel called to live somewhere off grid. So somewhere so secluded in a way that's just very green, surrounded by nature. I'd love to have my own garden, grow almost all my food. Yeah, dream home.
I love that. Look, I'll visit. Can I get some carrots in the garden, a bell pepper? Oh God.
You're welcome anytime, Candace.
Oh, thank you. I know you talked about what you want to accomplish in the next year. So let's kind of change gears a little bit. So did your upbringing play a role in where you are now or your career choice? And if so, how?
So I would say growing up, almost everything shaped, what I ended up, choosing as a career. And I think for a very long time, I didn't know myself what I wanted. And I sort of learned more about myself through every experience that I've had. Growing up, I was always someone that loved to learn. It didn't come easy to me at all. I actually had, or was labeled, as we talked about labels in the previous episode, with a diagnosis of selective mutism, which is essentially a form of separation anxiety when I was 5 years old. And a little bit about my background. I grew up at home. My parents, my brother, and my grandmother, we all lived together. And the first language that I was taught was Russian, because living with my grandmother, English was not, something that she spoke fluently. She has learned phrases over time, but Russian was her primary language. So it was introduced to me first. And so when I was entering kindergarten in the public school system, in an American school where you have to speak English, there was a bit of a disconnect there, going from speaking predominantly Russian, even though I knew some English, going into kindergarten and speaking, and I was very shy and introverted. And so it was a big change for me, I think, ultimately. And I feel like my mind, body, and soul didn't have enough time to sort of process everything, going from, being at home around those that bring me the most comfort to an environment where I knew almost nobody. And yeah, so that is kind of part of that experience that I've had in the school system. And then as I've gotten older, I, became more outspoken, and I've discovered that the subjects of science and math were subjects that came most natural to me. They were always something that I excelled in. They were the subjects that took me the least amount of time to complete assignments after school. And finally, I would say in high school, when I, started taking these subjects more seriously because of the expectation that, higher education comes next, I started taking more advanced, science and math courses, calculus and anatomy. And for the longest time, I actually thought I wanted to be a pediatric oncologist. So I wanted to be a doctor that helps children that have been diagnosed with cancer. And then I quickly realized that that was not something I could see myself doing from the emotional standpoint. And just it wasn't practical for me long term to do something like that. But science and math, I sort of discovered on my own, were my talents or gifts, if you will, in school. My parents, they had some influence to a certain degree. So my mom's background, she's in the nursing field, and my dad works in basically computer networking. So still under the umbrella of STEM in general. So perhaps there is just that natural influence of, science and math were just areas that, my family tends to just, have more of an acquired learning to. But after high school, I went to college for biochemistry. I wound up being biochemistry, I should say. I switched my major in college 3 times. I went essentially first for biomedical engineering. Then I was switched over to chemical engineering once I found out I loved chemistry. And then I still wasn't satisfied because I realized that engineering was not as much chemistry as I thought. It was more of the physics because of the engineering background, until I finally committed to biochemistry and math. And then after that, undergrad, I pursued a PhD in biochem, which all of this, I should say, was not something that my parents forced. It was something that I chose. Everything, like I said earlier in the interview, is a choice that we all make. I think all of these choices were a combination of inputs from other people. So hearing that, in society, it's valued that you get a stable career, that, there's that boundary or that level of financial stability. And, and there's these specific careers that people associate financial stability with, right? Like doctor, perhaps teacher, lawyer, all of those careers. And I chose the way I did just based on myself and tasting, like, okay, I know that science and math is my thing. I don't exactly know what I like about it. I just know I like it. So being the forever student that I am, I just decided to keep going and go to school and go to more school. So that is, in short, I guess that's kind of the answer to that. So yes, my parents had a bit of an influence in terms of, them also being in a field that is, in science and math, but they were always supportive in, whatever I chose to do, as long as it was, something that, was, financially stable and made me happy. So, yeah.
That's amazing, Sarah. I love what you said about the family supporting you and what you wanted to do, right? Your gifts, what came natural to you, and they gave you that confidence because of that support, and the fact that, growing up when you were younger, being an introvert, and truly blossoming, right? In years, to come, and look at you now. This is amazing. And you all, she's so humble. She really is. She has a lot,
Candace.
He's very humble. But I love that. I love that. So if you can go back and tell your 10-year-old self something, what would you tell her?
Okay, I would tell her that the world needs to hear your truth, and it's safe and okay to express yourself fully. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, that, you know, I was shy for a long time, and I, to a certain degree, was a people pleaser. I wanted to make sure everyone around me was, you know, happy, and I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. And over time, I realized that in doing that and pleasing others before pleasing myself, I carried a whole bunch of emotional baggage, I guess you can say, to the point where it makes you sick when you don't prioritize yourself and you don't speak your truth. You know, things can happen later on down the line. So yeah, I'm definitely speaking my truth, and it's still something that I work on daily, because there are definitely moments where I'm more comfortable speaking my truth and I'm more outspoken, and then there are some environments where it's still something I remind myself to do. So that is number one, and feeling safe. Safety is a big one for me. I realize that's sort of the root of my lack of speaking up. So the moments where I didn't speak up was because I feared the repercussions of somebody else, or failure, or whatever it is. And that all stems from, you know, not feeling safe in myself, in my decisions, in my body, and everything. So those are the two things I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, you think about how many children, you know, feel that same way, right? Where they feel like they have to please other people or they don't feel safe. And so the fact that you understand that, and you have grown, and it's a continuous healing journey, right? You definitely have a platform to speak on for children and families. So that's awesome, Sarah.
Thank you, Candace.
Telling you all, she's awesome. Okay. So what channels, and I know you kind of touched on this. I'm sure the audience, you know, has picked up on kind of some things that probably channel your passion, but what channels your passion for education? What are those things that light that fire under you for education?
So I think a few things. So number one, my personal experience as a student going through the education system. So part of that is sort of what I shared earlier, my experience with starting off in kindergarten, already being labeled with something, carrying that label for many years, associating myself with that label to the point where I exhibited, you know, physical characteristics. So I was physically like shy, I would get really anxious, I wouldn't speak in school for a few years. There was a time in kindergarten where my teacher didn't believe my parents that I knew how to read because I would just be mute. Like I wouldn't say anything. And that's a physical symptom that's associated with selective mutism, that, you know, you're getting all these inputs, you're hearing everything that people are saying, but it's almost like too much stimulus and you just freeze. You kind of like are frozen. You don't know what to do or say, or, and so my parents would have to record me reading at home and bring it to the teacher because she didn't believe that I knew how to read. So that was an interesting experience, but so that was just my, you know, elementary school experience. And then some of it carried over in middle school. And then my experience in high school was another interesting experience there. There was one moment where I had a guidance counselor that I was working with at the time, who kind of delineates what classes each student gets. This was my freshman year of high school. Freshman year in the high school that I went to, you weren't allowed to take any advanced placement courses. You can only take them starting your sophomore year. And so at the end of your freshman year, you fill out an application to apply for that, those AP classes. And, you know, there's a criteria. There's, you know, your GPA needs to be a certain, you know, type of, you know, grade point, and then you need to write an essay about why and answer some questions. So there's a process, right? And there's a certain rubric. I was in a program at the time that my guidance counselor, the guidance counselor of that program, chose not to give any students in that program the application. So I, you know, the deadline passed for this advanced placement, and I really wanted to be in that class. So then, you know, I had to, you know, go against sort of the grain a little bit and, you know, argue my points. And I eventually was allowed, given an application, I had like 3 days to do it, you know, an essay and a couple of other things, and hand it back. And I, you know, was chosen in that class, and that sort of was my first AP experience. But what I have to say on that is just that, so that guidance counselor basically didn't believe that anyone from that program was capable of taking an advanced placement class. Now, that is not only, of course, offensive to me, right? It's offending the whole student body that is in that program, right? So that was also another experience that I've had. So I was experienced that in high school. Experience I had in college, I had so many. I could talk hours on end about that. But basically, throughout my whole time as a student, there was many obstacles that I was presented with that I had to overcome, or, you know, go around. And that shaped my experience in wanting to, you know, help others. So being a student, also, I'm also a tutor. So I'm sort of the middleman between students and teachers and parents even. And one of my sort of primary jobs is to sort of be like a translator. So a lot of the students that come to me for tutoring, they have this disconnect between the subject material and the ability to like regurgitate it or process it through. There's that little disconnect where the students, they're just missing one little piece. And that's where I come in to help them translate not only the subject material, but what's going on in their mind. So that's also fuels my passion, and just to see how the children, you know, and students improve over time. Not only the students that I tutor, but just children, if you look at children in any environment, if you see children on the playground, if you see children's in your homes or in schools, wherever it is, children are incredible teachers in many ways. And they shake things off very easily. They, pick things up very quickly as well. And they just grow right before your eyes. And it's beautiful just to see that, from the education standpoint, of course, seeing, a student that you start working with, and then a few weeks or months or years later, just seeing how far they come. So that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is, Sarah. It's amazing, like kind of like a roadmap we have in life. Not anything is by a mistake. It's not a coincidence. Everything that kind of happens to us in our lives, it's amazing how it shapes us for our present, right? And it aligns us with our purpose. And you all, I didn't know a lot of these things with what fueled the passion and the fire for her. I knew some things, but not all. And hearing that is amazing. I mean, it really is. It speaks to the resilience, and it speaks to the activist in her, as well, and the perseverance. So that's pretty amazing, Sarah. It is amazing. Nice. So was education something, well, okay, I can ask that. Is education something you always saw yourself doing or no? I know you talked about being a pediatric doctor. I know you talked about that. But was that something, did it ever cross your mind, education, or no?
I would say no. Growing up, I probably wanted to be anything but an educator. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a dentist, a chef, a pastry chef, so many different things. But I feel like what all of those have in common with being an educator is the passion for helping others. That was something that I've always had. And the passion for helping others is something that is like an external motivator for me to, go through life. I love helping others. So I knew I wanted to fulfill that in some capacity. I sort of got little hints throughout my life that education might be something I want to consider more seriously. I would say the first moment that I got that little nudge from the universe is probably in middle school even. I was the student that was told that by other classmates that they would buy my notes because they were so nice and neat, and if only they had my notes, they would excel on such and such exam or assignment. So I was that student in middle school. In high school, I became more proactive and tutoring others, with no energetic exchange behind it. I would have a classmate, hey, I'm struggling with XYZ, and I would just help them. And what I saw not only was just it wasn't just me being nice. The feedback that I received, it was essentially that it was a gift. It was something that, they've tried to tutor, they went to extended time with their teacher one-on-one, they did all these different things, but for some reason, what I had to say in that moment resonated with them to help them complete the puzzle. So that was high school. And then in my undergrad, I winded up being a teaching assistant for my chemistry professor. I took chemistry 1 and 2 with him. And then after that, he asked me to be his teaching assistant for the next year class. And so I was a TA for that class. And so my responsibilities there were basically, I had a group of 25 college students and I had to teach them every week. So it was supplemental to the regular lecture. I would, help them more of a one-to-one attention. And I did that for chemistry. I did a whole bunch of tutoring for math. And then I started to think about opening my own tutoring business, because I saw not only how much it was needed nowadays, but how much it was not accessible to everyone. So there were some resources that were available to some, but not to all. And even in the college environment, I went to a city university, so not a state school, not a private school, a city school. And there's still a lot of gaps in, accessibility of resources. So many. And it's sad to see even at that level. And it really comes through in higher education. So, even if you have a student or a child that didn't have the support they needed in, let's say, middle school or elementary, and they continue through the education process and eventually pursue higher education, those gaps don't become smaller over time. They become larger over time if they are not addressed. Yeah, so that's kind of what I would say for that question.
Nice. It's amazing how God will put people in your path, or a certain, like you said, the universe. You just kind of knew, right? Or you came across a person where they needed your, help, and in helping them, you really enjoyed that feeling you got from helping them and having that feedback and understanding that God gave you a special gift that only you can do, and that you said to them, and like you said, it resonated, and the piece of the puzzle was there. So I think that's amazing. And yeah, that's amazing, Sarah. So how did you get into holistics? I know this is the podcast, right? Holistic meets education. So we talked about that education part. We're going to dive in a little bit into the holistic part. What got you into that? And kind of describe a little bit of the journey to us.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So my journey with holistics, I would say, started once I started my PhD program. So I decided in August of 2019 to pursue a PhD in biochemistry. And the approximate timeline for that is roughly 5 to 6 years, depending on the research experiments and sort of your individual progress with that. So I started in August. I completed one semester. It ended right before Christmas holiday. And I came out of there a mess. So I physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually felt like shit, quite frankly. And I didn't know what was going on. There were a lot of emotional symptoms, and as well as physical symptoms. And I couldn't pinpoint what was going on. I wasn't getting better. And so we had, luckily, a month off until the last week of January. That was our Christmas holiday with the program. And so I had a month to figure things out, basically. And so I spent that month at home trying to figure out what was going on. And at that point, I was not in school. So I basically lived at home, and I would commute roughly 2 hours one way to go to school. This was about 2 to 3 times a week for classes. In addition to that, we were also rotating in different labs. So since this is the first year of the PhD program, what they had us do is, even if we were committed to working with a specific PI, a principal investigator, so the professor of the lab, we still had to rotate in 4 different labs just to, gain some new techniques and really be sure that this was the professor we wanted to stick with for like 6 years. So 3 days a week I was commuting to classes, and then once or twice a week I was going to the lab. So this month off, I was not commuting to classes. The lab work, I would go like once a week. And so less stress technically, right? Because I wasn't in these classes, I didn't have to worry about exams. And it wasn't really too stressful in the lab because I'm not 100% committed to the lab yet. So it's not my project. I'm just sort of assisting and seeing if this is a good fit. So as time went on, nothing was getting better. The day before, I remember this like it was yesterday, January 27th, 2020, I was supposed to go start the next semester a day later. So January 28th was the first day of classes for the spring semester. January 27th, I have a full-blown panic attack. Now, I have had my experience with anxiety. As I mentioned earlier, I had some separation anxiety. I've had my bouts with just like generalized anxiety throughout my life, but this was something completely different, and it was terrifying because I've never experienced it before. So it was pretty severe because I felt complete loss of control of my body, and I just couldn't even move. I couldn't even comfort myself. Like it was really bad. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, my commute is at least 2 hours on a good day, one way to get to school on a bus. And having just had that panic attack, I knew I wouldn't be okay on a bus for 2 hours, because if I get a panic attack on the bus, I'm stuck on the bus. So it's not this local bus where you can get off at the next stop. This is like going from, one state to the next, and it's like keeps going. And so I ultimately had a conversation with my parents, and I was like, there's no way I can go to class. And I wasn't even in the state of mind to think about school. Not only couldn't I physically go, to class and whatnot, I couldn't even like think about it in my head. I was like, oh my God, I have classes tomorrow. And I was sitting there in my head, like, okay, I know which classes I have, all these classes, and a nightmare. So basically what ended up happening, to save you guys the long story, is that I basically decided to take a leave of absence for that semester. So the day before that semester was supposed to start, okay, I decided to take a leave of absence. And I remember vividly, like the first day of classes, I had one classmate that, I spoke with really. And she reached out to me. She's like, hey, like, why aren't you in class? Is everything okay? And I was not even in a state to answer her and be like, listen, this is what's going on. Like, I completely needed to step away from everything that program was. Like, I just needed to be with myself for a minute. And so since I took the semester off, that basically meant that I was not in classes or required to be in classes until May. So the semester ends in May. So that time frame of a few months is sort of what I had to figure some more stuff out. So that became my journey of doctor visit after doctor visit after doctor visit after ER visit. And so long story short, I've probably went to every specialist under the sun in Western medicine who, according to their testings, found me to have a clean bill of health, that everything was hunky-dory. My primary care physician, when I went to her, did a basic CBC, complete blood count panel, and was like, yeah, everything's fine. Here's an antidepressant, here's an anti-anxiety medication. And, once with antidepressants, especially like SSRIs, they take a few weeks to kick in, and you shouldn't, I should say, really, taper off them. So they take a while to kick in, and you don't want to like stop taking them very quickly. So she's like, yeah, you just take these and then you'll be fine. And, you can go back to school. And when she presented that to me, I was very much against it. I would say before then, I wasn't really I was never too fond of medicine, but I wasn't as, defensive about things like that up until that point. And then for whatever reason, my body knew that you shouldn't take that. You should not take that. So I came out of that appointment thanking her, walking out and knowing full well that I was not walking there again unless for some emergency, something. And in the meantime, I was speaking to my yoga teacher that I met throughout this time, and she mentioned to me that she had a studio where in that same office was essentially a naturopath, a functional medicine practitioner that does things through a more holistic approach. So I called that office, and the wait was for another 2 or 3 months. So I took the first appointment they had. And in the meantime, a family friend, my mom's coworker, actually mentions a nutritionist that was local to me that runs detailed blood work. And so I went to her. She ordered the blood work. Now, for everyone watching, when I say detailed blood work, I'm talking about 35 vials of blood work. Like, I had to have my blood drawn 2 separate visits because it was a lot of blood, a lot. And she tested me for things I was never tested for, things a regular doctor wouldn't test you for, things even some holistic doctors don't even test you for. And I found out a lot of information there. But one piece I'll mention here is, remember how I mentioned my primary care physician shoved a antidepressant essentially at me, right? And that specific antidepressant is a huge no-no for me. So one of the blood panels that was run was essentially it was a tox screen where it took all the different classes of drugs, and more specifically drugs within those classes, and tested it against your body's ability to metabolize that drug. So it broke it down into 3 classes, right? So, absolutely avoid, can't metabolize, you can take it, but proceed with caution, or, your reaction, your metabolism is good, right? Those 3 classes. And you can do that like with any, like Tylenol has specific opioids, has specific, all the different classes of drugs. But basically that specific drug that I was prescribed as an antidepressant was on cannot metabolize. If you do take it, will have severe side effects. That's where that specific antidepressant that I was prescribed ended up. And my body very clearly told me, like, do not take it. And I ended up not taking it, but so that was interesting. I found out some other pieces of the puzzle there. And then I went to this other practitioner that my yoga teacher recommended. And that was a big step in my holistic journey, because that was the first practitioner in the holistic space that I've, been to. All my life, I went to a regular primary care doctor. I didn't really know much about the holistic space. I knew what the word holistic meant, right? But that's about it. And so when I went to this practitioner, everything was different. She doesn't give you prescriptions. She didn't even really run blood work unless it was like absolutely needed. Everything was just completely different. So she specifically is what's called a kinesiologist, which is someone that works with the body, and specifically like the musculature and like the skeletal system and how your body reacts to different inputs. So what she would do is she would essentially touch certain points and give you something to hold in your hand. And based on whatever was in your hand, how your body reacted to it, like your body did something. So for me, the reaction was like, I would hold something in my hand if it was not ideal for my body, or if my body couldn't take it or process it, my hand would just go down. And it wasn't like me, like it was so like not, like I was not voluntarily doing that. It was like she would press and it would just lower. And it was an eye-opening experience to see that. Not only as someone that was ill and not feeling well, but as someone that had a quote unquote science background that thought they knew a lot of things about the body and health, to go and just see that, and essentially what I was told from her was that I had a few things going on. And these 3 things are not recognized in Western medicine. So number 1 being adrenal fatigue. So I'll talk about that in a second. The other thing being leaky gut, which is sort of thrown around a lot nowadays. And the third being candida overgrowth, and they're all related. So essentially what was happening to me, and this showed on my blood work that I had done, that my body was not absorbing pretty much nothing. My vitamin and mineral levels were either so drastically low or so drastically high. My vitamin C level was almost 0. It was like as if I had scurvy. And it's, not that I don't eat citrus or spinach or, any of that, right? But my body was not absorbing anything that was being put in. Even like I was taking vitamins that you can get at like the grocery store or whatever, wasn't absorbing anything. And so that had to do with the fact that I had what's called leaky gut, which was the fact that essentially your gut is a membrane that has channels. And if you eat or take in something that your body basically recognizes as foreign, it creates these holes, which then eventually leak in. So, and if you continue to eat those things or take those vitamins or supplements, whatever it is, those holes only become bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where it's like whatever goes in comes out. It's just like, it messes with a lot of things. And as we know today, gut health is very much connected with mental health. So the fact that I was exhibiting things like panic attacks, some instances perhaps of depression or anxiety, had to do with the fact that my gut was not doing well. It's not that it was, I'm so anxious and so depressed that I need to be taking 4 medications for my depression and 3 medications for my anxiety. That correlation my primary care doctor, and Western medicine would have never made. And I've been in an ER multiple times for my symptoms in the past, and I've been to a primary care and a GI and an endocrine, like everybody. And so that was interesting to see. And that also kind of led me down the holistic rabbit hole in general. Since that point, I've done so much digging myself personally, in, you know, what supplements I choose to take, how I choose to eat. Yeah, but it was that journey of going through school and not feeling well, which another point I just want to say quickly on this is that your body is so incredibly wise. And when we don't listen to it, its whisper is going to become a scream, like, very quickly. So if you don't tune in to the messages that it's trying to give you, it'll take you out. You know, it's much better for you to step away than for your body to take you out. And this is coming from my own personal experience. A lot of the issues that I've had, yes, some of it was perhaps how I ate in college, not ideal. You know, it wasn't horrible, it wasn't the worst, but not ideal, definitely. Lack of movement, lack of sunlight, always like staring at a screen or in a lab for hours, you know, constantly sitting. That was definitely part of it. But the other part of it that I realized later on down the road was doing something that you don't like is stress on the body. Stress is such a common word nowadays, and a lot of people just associate stress with school, or work maybe, or, oh, I'm stuck in traffic, that's stressful, or a loved one passes away, that's stress. But at the very, very basic level, stress is going into an environment that your body is not prepared for. And whether or not that means like something that you like or not, you know, that's, you know, up for grabs, but it's that was the case with me, basically. So in grad school, yes, I was good at math and science, like I mentioned earlier, but was it something that I truly wanted to do? No. And I didn't know that, and I didn't realize that until I was pulled out of it.
I really need you to repeat this, Sarah, about what you talked about. That was a golden nugget right there. You said stress is what? Going into an environment that you're not prepared. Can you say that again?
Yes. So stress, you know, and this is kind of my understanding of it at the very basic level, is going into an environment or experience that your body does not have the capacity to hold or process or absorb or take in. It's like, you know, trying to push beyond your limit. That's when we experience stress. That's when the body experiences stress. When we try something, think of it as, you know, going to, I don't know, even to the gym and you work out. The tendency is to push yourself so that you feel something, right? That feeling is a result of going further than your capacity. And stress is that, and it doesn't take a huge life event like the passing of a loved one or something like that to put you in a state of stress. You know, if you're not in every moment, every day, checking in with yourself and seeing what you need in that moment, you can be, you know, letting things go that might not be something that, are supportive to you. And that was the case for me. Math and science were a big part of my life for a very long time. I went to pursue higher education just because I was like, I got my undergrad degree. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do at that point. I was like, yeah, okay, I have a bachelor's in biochem and math. I didn't want to work in industry. That was the only thing I knew. I didn't want to go work for like a company to, make whatever, some drug. Like I didn't want to do that. So I was like, okay, the logical thing is to go and dedicate my life to, 9 to 5, perhaps longer every day in a lab, which looking at that now, I can't imagine myself doing that. I just can't. And that caused the stress because every day going in, even if you're thinking that you're happy, you going in with the mentality of like, yeah, I'm happy, I'm fulfilled, but that you're not fulfilled, it's just counteractive, So yeah, that's the stress. Doing what doesn't make you feel happy and doing it to please somebody for whatever it is, that might catch up to you later on.
Well, thank God. I'm sorry that the situation happened to you, but thank God it happened to bring you into that awareness and also to put you on that holistic journey and understanding holistic approach, meeting an educational approach. So that's really, really nice. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And I'm sure the audience, yeah, there was a lot of nuggets in there, a lot of nuggets. All right. So what role do you play when it comes to the education system now? What role do you play?
So I feel like I play multiple roles depending on the interaction I have with the student and their parents. So my formal label is just I'm a tutor, right? So I tutor students in science and math, generally speaking, from kindergarten through the university level, both one-to-one and in groups. But sometimes, even though I'm considered the tutor, sometimes I become the teacher, the primary teacher or the educator, because even though they're in school, I have too many students that come to me and tell me, I learned nothing in school. I don't know what's going on. It doesn't make sense. It's too difficult. The material isn't being explained in a way that I can process. So sometimes I play the role of the actual primary educator. The tutor, I feel like, is sort of the in-between messenger, right? Someone that connects both, with the parents and the teacher, has some connection there, but also connects with the student. I'm the student at times too. I can't tell you how many times where I'm having a tutoring session, and especially with the new Common Core curriculum, at least here in New York State, that is very interesting nowadays, where they teach students how to do things a very specific way, and it needs to be done a certain way, where the student has to teach me this new way of learning, because when I learned these fundamentals, I was not taught with all this, drawing and all this stuff. So I'm also the student. And sometimes I'm the parent or the friend even as well, working with students, like I kind of mentioned earlier, they're incredibly innocent beings, and they have such a, kind heart, and sometimes they just need to share what's on their mind. And especially once you get to know the student over time, you form that dynamic where, they can speak to you about how things are. Sometimes that leads into, how things are at school, outside of, math class or science class. How do they feel at school? So I play all the roles.
I love that. I love that. And that is why you are so needed. And I'm excited for podcasts to come because we have a lot more to really go in depth with you all about. So awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So looking kind of back over your career, did you make any mistakes? And if you did, what did you learn from them?
I definitely made mistakes for sure. I would say in the very beginning when I was first trying to establish myself as a tutor, I was sort of overdoing it to the point of like, not even so much just trying to sell myself, but I was so unsure of my even my teaching abilities, where that would come across in the lesson, where like my lack of confidence would, the student would catch that, and would kind of not resonate with what I'm saying. It comes across very easily, right? When you're interacting with people, how they present affects you. And so that's definitely something that, came from more so a lack of experience. Another piece, I guess, is what I think is a mistake is just not putting myself out there. I, for a long time, being that I was introverted, but also somewhat of, I guess, low self-esteem, you can say, is that I didn't think I was good enough, or I didn't think that, it was parents or whoever should pay me a certain amount, or I didn't think that, I should even be paid at one point. I remember, I was giving so much for nothing. And while that's great on the receiving end, on the giving end, it's not. And yeah, so undervaluing myself, not speaking my truth also applies here, because I've had some instances where, I noticed some things with students, and in the very, very beginning, I was a little hesitant to kind of mention to the parents certain things that I picked up on, because I didn't want it to be offensive, or I didn't want it to come across as, your child has a problem. But it was something that I noticed from working with the child, and it was something that wasn't noted by others. So that's another thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So, what is the most rewarding thing about being in the field that you are in right now?
Definitely the most rewarding thing is contributing to all of these people that you interact with. Like I mentioned earlier, right? Any interaction, takes on the experience of both sides. So if it's a conversation that you have with two people like Candice and I, right? What I share and talk about and how I present myself affects Candice, and the way she speaks and what she shares affects me. So when I have that environment in my tutoring practice, I impact not only the student if I'm working with them, but also the parent if I'm interacting with them, the teacher, and just every interaction is a beautiful one, and everyone has so much to share with one another, just on the fact that we're all, individuals, right? And our experiences are all different, and we have so much to offer to each other if, we open our hearts a little bit. So yeah, just those interactions are incredibly valuable to me. And of course, seeing the students evolve over time, and just not only in their knowledge, right? Because I don't just tutor and teach for students to regurgitate information. Anybody can go read a book and learn to memorize what's written and spit it back out. That's not my goal when I tutor. I teach for understanding, right? I don't teach to get an A on a test, right? Because at the end of the day, those marks don't matter. Like 5 years down the line, you're not going to care, what you got on your math test in 5th grade. Like it's just irrelevant. Yeah, so that's what I find most rewarding, I think.
That's beautiful, Sarah. So how are you different than the Sarah a year ago?
I feel like I'm a completely different person, even from like yesterday. So I feel like with every day, I gained a lot more confidence in myself to speak up, even in this creation of the podcast that, we're doing together. It was something that if you would have asked me a year ago to do it, I would have been like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I realized that, I have a lot to say, and not only I have a lot to say, but it's needed to be said as well, and it's needed to be heard. So that's a big difference. Also with my health, there's been a lot of shifts that I've made since 2021. And every day it's a constant journey with that. So those are the 2 main things.
Yes, amen to that, Sarah. Amen. So this is the last question that I have for you. What do you want to accomplish from this podcast?
So what I want to accomplish with the podcast, I want all the listeners to tap into their freedom, whatever that looks like. If you're an educator and you're tuning into this podcast, I want you to discover that everything is within you. You have everything that you need in every moment. And there is no need to outsource your power to anyone or anything. We just have been conditioned to do that because as a way of sort of forming that distrust between ourselves. So if you're an educator, teacher, student, parent, just anybody that's tuning in, that is the goal with the podcast for me, for you just to realize that you're everything you will ever need ever. It's not about, just holistic, tidbits that Candace and I will definitely share, and, things with the education system we'll definitely talk about. And if that's relevant, awesome. If it's not, that's okay. But at the end of the day, what's important is like for you to discover your own power.
Ooh, nuggets on top of nuggets on top of nuggets. Audience, do you hear that? Amazing. This concludes the interview with Sarah Stein. Please make sure you check us out on YouTube, Holistic Meets Education. And also, please go on the Apple Podcast and check out our episode 1, Breaking Up with the Education System, and also check out this interview. And we have another interview coming up, which will be with me, CANDI Smith. So stay tuned for that. So thank you all so much, Truth Seekers.